17 fastest growing economies in Africa. Recently, the International Monetary Fund published its World Economic Outlook database for 2022, which includes the organization's forecasted growth in the gross domestic product for all nations worldwide. Overall, Africa's economic growth was projected at 4.5% in 2021, but the war in Ukraine has introduced a new and tragic development, with the result that growth in 2022 will slow to 3.8%. East Africa maintained its lead as the continent's fastest-growing region, followed by North Africa and West Africa's. In no particular order, let's see the 17 fastest-growing economies in Africa. 17. Kenya. Kenya's economy has experienced significant growth, as evidenced by the nation's strong performance in the tourism, higher education, telecommunications, energy, industry, and manufacturing sectors. The demand-side factors of household consumption, investment, and services will drive the real GDP to grow by 5.7% in 2022. 16. Gambia. The Gambia has a market-based, liberal economy distinguished by traditional subsistence farming. About 70% of the labor force is employed in agriculture, which contributes roughly 30% of the nation's GDP. Following the political change in 2016, GDP growth quickened to 5.7% in 2018, driven by a rebound in trade, construction, tourism, agriculture, and these industries. In 2022, it is predicted to be 5.6%. 15. Rwanda. Rwanda's economy suffered heavily during the 1994 genocide. The ethnic cleansing caused a large drop in GDP and destroyed the country's ability to attract private and external investment. The economy has since strengthened, with per capita nominal GDP estimated at $909.9 in 2022. Rwanda's real GDP has been estimated by the IMF to grow at 6.4% in 2022, almost 2 times higher than the regional average, making it one of the fastest growing economies. 14. Democratic Republic of Congo. The largest nation in sub-Saharan Africa is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. The DRC is blessed with exceptional natural resources, including a sizable amount of arable land, an abundance of biodiversity, and the second largest rainforest in the world. One of the poorest countries in Africa is the DRC. The nation's real GDP is anticipated to grow at a rate of 6.4% by the end of 2022. 13. Niger. The primary and tertiary sectors performed well, with real GDP growth projected to reach 6.9% in 2022 from an average of 5.6% over the 2016 to 18 period. Investments in infrastructure, extractives, and services, as well as structural reforms, particularly creativities intended at development, the private sector, and boosting agricultural resilience, are responsible for this growth. With a projected rate of 3.8% for 2022, inflationary pressures remained under control. 12. South Sudan. This landlocked nation, officially known as the Republic of South Sudan, is predicted to have one of the fastest economic growth in Africa. In 2022, the real GDP growth rate was predicted to be 6.5%. The peace agreement that was signed in September 2018 and the reopening and restart of some oil fields, including those in Upper Nile State, were the main factors in this year's ranking. The economy continues to be primarily driven by the oil industry, followed by the service sector and agriculture. 11. Mauritius. Since gaining its independence from Great Britain in 1968, Mauritius' economy has transformed from one based primarily on agriculture and low income to one that is highly diversified and based on tourism, textiles, sugar, and financial services. The nation is one of the richest in Africa and has a high ranking for economic competitiveness. The economy is still performing well. In 2018 and 2019, real GDP growth was 7.4% as of 2022. It is 6.1% but growing. 10. Equatorial Guinea. Cocoa, coffee, and timber were the traditional foundations of Equatorial Guinea's economy, but in the 80s, The discovery and exploitation of petroleum and natural gas drastically altered the country's economic structure. More than half of Equatorial Guinea's gross domestic product and the vast majority of its exports are now made up of petroleum. Equatorial Guinea's real GDP growth is anticipated by the IMF to reach 6.1% in 2022 as a result of the primary and tertiary sector's impressive performance. 9. Côte d'Ivoire. Since gaining independence, the economy of Côte d'Ivoire has expanded more quickly than that of the majority of other African nations. Taxes on agricultural exports may be one factor in this. The nation is the fourth largest exporter of general goods in sub-Saharan Africa and the largest exporter of cocoa beans in the world. The economy is still performing well. Real GDP growth in 2021 was 6.5%, and it is anticipated that in 2022 it will fall to 6.0%. 8. Benin. Benin's economy is dependent on local trade, cotton production, and subsistence farming. Around 30% of the GDP and more than 50% of total official export receipts are attributed to cotton. Benin's economic growth is expected to reach 5.8% and is still strong. While services continue to make up the largest portion of GDP, this is primarily due to Benin's geographic location, which facilitates trade, transportation, transit, and tourism activities with its neighboring states. The agricultural sector is the main driver of growth, with cotton being the main export. 7. Manchuria. Manchuria is expected to continue growth momentum in 2022, up by 0.2 percentage points, due to elevated oil prices and good performance in non-oil sector. Resource-rich countries, especially their extractive sectors, will see improved economic performance due to the war in Ukraine, while non-resource-rich countries will experience a deceleration in economic activity. 6. Zambia. Zambia is expected to benefit from rising metal prices in the short and medium term and gain from the transition away from fossil fuels in the long term due to this. Its economy has stepped up. 5. Angola. With the non-oil sector growing by around 3.1% and the oil sector by 1.6%. GDP in Angola is expected to reach $74 billion by the end of 2022, according to Trading Economics global macro models and analysts' expectations. 4. Botswana. Botswana is one of the fastest-growing economies in Africa and is set to continue making strides with expected economic growth of 9.7% in 2021. The government has further forecast 4.3% growth in GDP before the end of 2022. According to analyses, its growth is progressively good. 3. Tanzania. Tanzania's GDP has been increasing since 2016, reaching $62.4 billion in 2020, growing at a rate of about 6% over the past 5 years. Inflation declined to 3.3% in 2020 following stabilization in food prices. The 2020 African Economic Outlook report stated that Tanzania was among the world's 10 fastest-growing economies that year. In 2020, the country reached lower middle-income status. Tanzania's Development Vision 2025 aims to propel the country further towards the middle-income bracket by 2025. The African Development Bank forecasts Tanzania's GDP will grow by 4.9% before the end of 2022. 2. Djibouti. Djibouti's GDP has been growing year on year since 1997 thanks to its position as a transportation hub in East Africa. About 30% of the world's shipping passes through the neighboring Strait of Bab el-Mandeb on the way to the Suez Canal. Growth looks set to continue as trade continues to pick up globally. 1. Ethiopia. Ethiopia has witnessed a continuous economic growth for years now. Its GDP is expected to reach $112 billion by the end of 2022, according to Trading Economics global macro models and analysts' expectations. In the long term, the Ethiopia GDP is projected to trend around $115 billion in 2023, according to our econometric models. Those were the 17 fastest growing economies in Africa. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell.